Okay, so soaring weather. I'm going to just start it off very, very simply. So I think all of us, there's a fair selection of people on this evening. So, but I think we can do all the sort of bronze sea weather we like, but the most important thing is that you've got to be able to read the weather to be able to soar well, or at least be able to know when you're going to soar well. Now, there's sort of three parts to that. There's obviously on a small scale of knowing where a thermal core is. I'm not really going to cover that tonight. Uh, on the medium scale of being able to estimate how the weather is likely to develop throughout the course of a flight. So if you're soaring locally, or if you're going cross country and you're in different areas, and on a larger scale of deciding which days to fly on. Now, that nice picture there of some soaring above Denby. Chris, you might recognise that photo. You took it, or your wife took it. I can't remember which. You
I thought
recognise it?
that wing looked familiar.
Yeah, the that's my pick. You took a photograph of my pick when we both soared away from Denby the time we were there. So a lovely picture. So, and that's what all this is about, really. I mean, for me, gliding is very much about what can we do with the weather we've got, and whether it be thermal, whether it be hill soaring, whether it be wave, and I'm going to cover all three this evening. So this sort of next statement is quite a good one, really. I say there's probably nothing that makes as much difference to what you can achieve. So simply picking the right days on which to fly, and the words behind that, obviously. However, be warned, always waiting for the perfect day is no good either. You'll miss the good days. There's lots of good days, and you can get so much out of whatever day you're flying on and when you're soaring. But if whatever you do, I mean, the picture on the right, obviously two handsome blokes in a K13. What more could you want in life? You've got there
Wait, Graham, I've
a
got a wrong picture
photograph.
there. I've just got you and Charles, I think.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Thanks. Well, you're right, but two handsome blokes, as I said, cheeky git. But this actually was a strange day. This was a day in August where the weather had been appalling all day, and then at about 2 or 3 o'clock, it cleared through. We got in a thermal. No, not we didn't get with thermal. We got in the K13. We took a reasonable aerotow, got into wave, and we're up for an hour and a half in wave. And in fact, that photograph was taken somewhere the other side of Shawbury, west of Shawbury, at about 5.5, 6,000 feet in sort of very shallow, pleasant wave. So as it says here, get it right and what a joy. So soaring for me is all about understanding the weather, being optimistic, and understanding what you might get out of a day. So what is good gliding weather and how can you predict when that will be? Well, there's a lot of different things out there that can help you understand what weather's coming. And I think from a very simple and simplistic basis, the BBC weather's as good as anything. It'll give you a general picture of what the weather's going to be. It'll give you a general picture of the wind and which direction it's coming from, whether it's going to be cloudy or sunny, whatever. And then there's other things that you can use that are available, some free, some not free. RASP is a free resource that's out there, RASP Stratus. And there's, that I'm not going to go through how to use that today, but it's a really good mechanism for just predicting what the day is going to be. Even the most simplistic is it going to be a 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star, etc. type day? And that straight away gives you a good clue. Okay, it's not always going to get it right. And a 5-star day might turn into a 3-star day, or a 3-star day might turn into a 5-star day. Who knows? Um, but it'll give you a guide. Top Meteo is good. I used to use that, but I went away from that because I felt SkySight, which is the one I use at the bottom there, that was a bit more accurate. Plus, it gives wave forecast as well. And believe it or not, XC Weather's another free one. So Top Meteo and SkySight you pay for. RASP is free. XC Weather is another free weather forecasting app. And that's very good. It's pretty accurate, to be fair. I made that statement at the bottom there, all very helpful, but rarely bother much more than 48 hours out. Generally, because of the weather we have, it can be a little bit unpredictable. So you might be there one day thinking, "Oh, it's going to be great" on a Monday or a Tuesday, and by Saturday it's gone to absolute pants. And we have that a lot in the UK, and the reason is we're a maritime nation. We've got polar air, we've got maritime air, we've got continental air coming towards us, but generally we have maritime air. So you know, really 48 hours, much more than that, and it's really a big guess. But I mean, it gives you an indication, but basically it's a big guess, and it's usually spoilt by the fact that fronts come through faster or slower than we expect. So sometimes it can be much better than we're expecting, and sometimes it can be much worse. So I think from a weather forecasting point of view, and I know these are just plenty of words, but the most useful method for visualizing the weather over a large area is a synoptic chart. Now, I think that's a basic for anybody who's doing what we're doing. Understanding a synoptic chart is really, really important. So, as it says there, it's a map showing surface pressure, areas, high and low pressure, and weather fronts. Isoboy, is- it's easy for me to say tonight. Isobars join points of equal pressure and are typically spaced at 4 millibar intervals. Cold fronts are marked with triangles, warm fronts with semicircles, both in the direction of movement. So, what does that mean? So, a really basic but quite a normal sort of synoptic chart for this country, particularly in the summer. So what have we got? We've got a cold front. You can see the cold front here with triangles, and the triangles are in the direction of movement. So the cold front is moving left to right, so it's moving towards the continent in this situation. A warm front, that's the bit with the semicircles on, that's moving in this direction. Oh, I don't know whether you can see that, but I've just won something on the premium bonds. Okay, so here, what you've got here is a ridge of high pressure. It's not a massive high pressure ridge here, but this is pretty normal, and this is the sort of thing we're looking for. So you've got the isobars. You know that when they're tighter and closer together, it's more windy, and when they're further apart, it's not so windy. So that we're looking for not too much wind. We're looking for what's called a cold sector after a cold front. And I'll go on to explain that more. But basically, a low pressure is going around this way. You can see Can you see my cursor going around? Everybody?
Yeah, we can.
Anybody? Good. And of course, a high pressure, the wind is effectively circling around. The center of the high is down here, actually. So it's a ridge building. So the high pressure is going around this way, the low pressure is going around that way. And yeah, you can read all the books you want about Coriolis effect, and that's how it all works. But quite frankly, I can't be asked to do that tonight. So I just want to talk about soaring. So as this says, one of the reasons the synoptic chart is so useful for mid-latitudes is it gives you the general direction of the wind, and it also tells us roughly how strong the wind is. So going back to that, basically, if the isobars are close together, it's windy. If they're far apart, it's not so windy. You know, I mean, I think you can get into all sorts of complications with weather, but for me, you just want to understand the general weather and how is it going to look when you get on the day to fly. So sort of reverting back to a very similar situation that we saw on the synoptic chart a few slides ago. Now, this is from a book by Tom Bradbury. It's called Meteorology or Weather, Meteorology and Flight. I can't remember the exact title. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to just talk through the sort of a classic. This is going to be a soarable day or a soarable weekend. Um, uh, from very, very basic. So we saw this similar situation in the synoptic chart that I showed above. And what we've got is we've got a low pressure that's gone through from the Atlantic, not unusual, with a cold front that's crossed the country with a ridge of high pressure behind it. Now, it's not an unusual situation, and it's the sort of thing that we're looking for on a thermic type day for sort of thermic weather to say, right, okay, that's what we're looking for to get a good day. So that's all very well, but before we get to there, we want to look at the other sorts of lift there are. So if we want to go soaring, there's three basic sorts of soarings. Hill lift, which is very simple. The wind blows against a hill. The air can't go through the hill, so it either has to go round it or up over it. Now, if it's a long ridge, it will mostly go over it. But if it's like a bit like a hill like the Wrekin or something like that, that works on one face. But where it's more of a pinnacle type face, it just goes round it. So that's not much good for hill soaring. So as it says there, wind doesn't necessarily have to be blowing directly up the ridge for it to produce lift, but that's ideal. But within an angle of about 45 degrees, that's acceptable. So our first sort of soaring is really when the wind blows up a ridge. Now this is the Clwydian range. So Chris will know this really well. There's Bodfari, that's Denbigh there. Lewini Park is there, Denbigh's there. And that photograph you saw earlier that Chris took was taken from about here. So he was about here, I was about there, and we just soared away from here. And in fact, on that day, the weather was such that the hills weren't working. That I think the wind was from the north, so we were thermaling. But when the wind blows from the west, which is over here, to the east, it hits this ridge, and all the way along this ridge, it's forced up over the ridge, and all we do is fly along that ridge. In fact, this here is sort of a knoll that you jump back from Denbigh, having had a winch launch, and you soar the front of that until you're high enough, and then you jump back onto these higher ridges. Really quite straightforward to do. And gives you a lot of pleasure because this is about 15 kilometers long, maybe a bit longer. And you can soar up and down this ridge to, usually in hill lift up to probably 2,500 feet, 3,000 feet. I mean, okay, then we use that to push into wave into the valley, the Clwydian Vale of Clwyd, where you can get into wave, but that's a different thing, which we'll talk about wave a bit later. But just flying along that ridge in air that's pushed up over the ridge is an excellent way to keep in the air, and you can be up there for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours, however long you want to be, really, as long as the wind is blowing up the ridge. And another example of this is shown on as like a contour map. This is actually Portmoak up in Scotland. I've not flown at Portmoak. I'd love to, because the ridge here is quite long. And it's very steep and it's very clean and clear, and there's an awful lot of flying that goes on up here, ridge soaring, and then they push into wave off of this. But so that's very basic. That's hill soaring. But we don't have a hill, so the best sort of flying we're going to get in the summer and in the autumn and in the spring is from thermals. So very basic theory about thermals. I mean, look, there's plenty of books you can read about thermals and soaring and cross-country flying. I mean, I quite like G. Dale's books on soaring. I've only read the first one. I haven't quite got to the second or third, but the first one is very good for just basic understanding of soaring flight. Soaring thermaling technique is in there as well. G's thermaling technique confuses me. So I tend to level out in the sturges personally, but that's how I work. But the theory is this: on a warm sunny day, the sun heats the ground, which heats a thin layer of air immediately above it. This rises in bubbles or perhaps columns. There's a bit of debate as to how that works, but I think most of us think that that's bubbles. Plenty of sun. Air mass is unstable. So we know that a cold sector behind a cold front is unstable, but we've got to be in the right bit of that for it to be working quite well, which we'll talk about as we go forward. And as it says there, so not so unstable that it generates into showers. Now, we get a lot of that in this country, where you get a lot of overdevelopment, or it's so unstable, you get very towering cumulus. And then when you get that towering cumulus, you get instability, you get showers, and you've got to deal with those if you're cross-country flying, or if you're on a long silver badge claim type flight. You want to stay up a long time, so you've got to avoid the showers. And sometimes you have to, soar a bit, 5 or 10 kilometers one way to avoid the big showers, and then come back round. And once the shower's passed, of course, then the air can go quite dead around that area. So you want to be mindful of that. So the perfect day is not the day where you've got really unstable air, but unstable enough, but not too unstable. But we'll come to that. So preferably not too windy, and preferably not easterly. Now, in this country, we tend to, if we get soarable weather from the east, and we do get soarable weather from the east, I'm not saying we don't, it can be very foggy and misty and crap visibility. And if it's from the southeast, personally, I don't think, I don't like flying in thermals from Seifert in southeasterly, because we don't, it's just never very good. But from most other areas, and particularly from the west, northwest, we get some really good conditions. Okay, it also gives us other problems from the northwest because of Cheshire Gap and sea breezes coming in, but you can usually deal with those. You usually get far enough away from the site, particularly if you're cross country flying, so that you can get away into the better conditions, and then as you're coming back, you can final glide through fairly dead air from quite high, from quite a long way away. I mean, let's remember that at 4,000 feet, you're going to go about 10 kilometers per 1,000 feet. So you can be 30 kilometers away from 4,000 feet and still have 1,000 feet to spare when you get back. Okay, it's not always quite as straightforward as that, but it's near as damn it. So the ideal, as it says here, the ideal is a ridge of pressure, high pressure following a cold front in late spring or summer with a light westerly. So if we go back to Bradbury's little diagram, I think this is a very this is so basic, and it looks really old-fashioned, but it's such a simple way of looking at things. And what Bradbury's done here is he's shown this low pressure with the cold front having gone through, and then he's marked on this diagram A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So these are all the different zones of this parcel of air, if you like. And so what we do, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go through each zone to try and explain where what's happening in each zone. So I mean, anybody can have a copy of this presentation. It's not a problem at all. Everybody's welcome to it. So area A. So that's not at the center of the low pressure. It's probably, I don't know, a third of the way out from the center, maybe a bit more. And let's just read these, because I think it's fairly straightforward. So as the front passes over the country, there would have been 8/8 cover. Okay, it's a cold front, low cloud, possible rain, drizzle, depending on how active the front was. When the front clears, there's quite often a sudden clear slot, which is quite flyable, with rapidly rising cloud base and weak thermals. Depending on how far from the center of the low, conditions can develop into cross-country weather for a few hours. So what that's saying is that this part of the cold sector is pretty stable, but it's pretty transient as well. It's moving away quite quickly. It's quite small, so you're going to get some good soarable conditions in that sector. If we then go to area B, so what it's basically saying, and what's worth understanding, is the closer you are to the center of the low, the more unstable behind the cold front it is. And actually what you've got there is you've got a warm front that's caught up with the cold front and created an occlusion. So the low air, close to the low, the air is very unstable, will lead to rapid development of showers. So this is the situation where you've got large shower clouds, or maybe even the odd thunderstorm, but you're probably looking more at troughs for that. But so associated with large areas and possibly remnants of cold front. So basically, the closer you are to the cold front, the more mixed and unstable, and it's too fresh, if you like. So the further you're getting away, it's not quite so fresh, but it's fresh enough to give you a few hours. Okay, so then you get to area C. As it says, the isobars here are fairly straight and close together. The wind strength here is likely to be fairly strong, because you see the isobars are quite straight, they're quite close together. But you might get cloud streaks here. And as it says, the conditions are favorable for waves. So you've got this sort of squashy area between the low and the high that's here, and you're getting quite good long isobars, so long stretches of quite strong wind. Now, of course, cloud streaks, and we'll see a picture of that in a minute. Cloud streaks are great, because if we fly up and down cloud streaks, we can get high fairly quickly in good strong lift, and then we can fly along those cloud streaks to make our way up and down wind. So on a day like that, if you had that situation, it was a bit lower and it was over us, you'd say, all right, well, let's set a task, a cross-country task up and down the wind, and shoo, away we go. That'd be great, wouldn't it? So that for me is a really good way of looking at it. And then we get into area D. Okay, so let's just read the words again. This area is situated under a weak ridge. However, and this is a weak ridge, however, despite the air coming from the northerly direction, it's still at a long sea track. So most, you can see this air is coming out across the sea. So it's come across the Irish Sea as well as the Atlantic. So it's hit a lot of sea. So it's quite moist. And as it says, also this area, the inversion level will be lower and restrict the vertical development of the clouds. Some degree of spread out will probably develop. Now, I've mentioned that word inversion there. I'm not going to explain that too much, other than to say that it's where normally you'd expect with height the temperature to decrease. So you've got, say, 10 degrees on the ground or whatever, 20 degrees on the ground, and as you go higher, it gets colder and colder and colder. An inversion is where you reach a point where that temperature is actually warmer, and so therefore it stops the vertical development of and the cold air progressing through it. So, and often you'll get that an inversion. What an inversion actually looks like is if you look at it on a summer's day, say a nice hazy, warm, high pressure day where nothing much is happening, they say, oh, it's going to be great for thermals. And then you get up there and there's no thermals, and you get a sort of a line where they stop at about 1,500 feet. You can't actually see any clouds. You just get to this smoggy layer of crapness, and that obviously a technical term, that's your inversion layer, and your thermals won't go through it. Okay, I mean, that's not a very scientific description of inversion. Somebody else will do a lot better job, but it's a crap layer where things won't go through. That seems a good enough description to me. So then you get to area E. So this is in the middle of a strong ridge of high pressure with anticyclonic curvature. Is always good sign for soaring conditions. If the ridge extends over the UK, the next day, then conditions will be good for cross-country soaring. So we've got a fairly big area. It's going to hopefully move that way. So everything's sort of moving left to right and from bottom to top. It's getting closer to the higher pressure. But it's not close enough that the air is sort of dead, if you like. So have you noticed that really, if you look at it, and obviously this is a bit of an idealistic situation, you're sort of halfway between the high pressure and the low pressure. The closer you get to either high or low, the more crappy things get. So in between, so D and E have both got some good soaring conditions. A is good as well. Sorry, not A, but A can be good, C can be good. So everything round about the middle between the two, one way, left, right. Excuse me a second. Daisy, shush. I don't know, bloody children, eh? Hey. So, okay, so that's that area. So that's a good area. And if that moves over to us, then we're going to have a good cross-country day potentially. Now, obviously a high pressure then starts building. So the air is becoming a little bit deader, if you like. So in area F, as the high pressure builds, the height of the substance inversion will lower. So the inversion will get lower. This is good for restricting the growth of cumulus, but eventually it may dip below the condensation level, leading to blue conditions. So actually in F, we can still get soarable weather, but because of the progression of the high pressure, you get to a situation where you're not actually getting any cumulus form. Now, really, when you start to get sort of blue days and you're trying to soar, because you've no longer got the sort of markers of the cloud, what you're looking for there is you're looking for hot spots on the ground. And that, for soaring wise, I'd be saying, well, I'd be going between town and village and all that sort of thing. And I think G. Dale in his book mentioned something about imagine yourself walking on the ground with bare feet. And what you want to do is walk on areas that are hot. So if you can imagine yourself walking on grass as opposed to earth, as opposed to concrete, the ones that feel hotter to your feet are the ones that are going to give you a good thermal source. So blue days are very often days, and I'm shocking at flying in blue conditions, if I'm honest. I hate it. But they're the days where you're looking for hot spots and you're going to those, you're jumping from hot spot to hot spot to hot spot to keep yourself in the air. And that works quite well. Okay, so that's area F. But then when you get into area G, we'll read this again. As the high pressure persists, the inversion level gets even lower. Days are cloudless, leading to high surface temperatures. Eventually, the surface temperature may be enough to break the inversion level, leading to high level cumulus, which can be excellent, usually in the afternoons. You can see there west of the high pressure an approaching warm front. As it arrives, it will be marked by high cirrus cloud, which may well cut out sufficient sun's heating to lead to a premature end for soaring day. And then once a high pressure really sort of establishes itself, I always think of the air as beautiful weather for lying there having a suntan and training and stuff like that, but not so good for soaring and cross country flying. So, I mean, obviously all of this is a bit of a generalization, but even so, if it goes well, we get some lovely landscapes or skyscapes, should I say, which tells us that we can fly across country. I actually took this photograph last year at Granston Lodge when I was not last year, the year before, when I was doing my my D module, and we were training and we were doing bloody circuits and launch failures, and this was happening above our head, and I'm thinking, oh crap. but looking at it today, one, it's beautiful, and two, people were shooting around 4, 5, 6, 700 kilometers this day. You've got beautiful cumulus clouds. They're not overdeveloping, they're not too big. A real classic cumulus day. But we get that local to us as well. This maybe doesn't look quite so good, but it's still a very good day. And this is a very similar photograph, a similar looking day. I flew down to Talgarth last August in my glider, and there and back, I think it's 240 kilometers, and it looked like this all the way. It never got any better than this, but this was pretty good. We've got nice flat bases. It's not going too high. Actually, on that day, it overdeveloped a bit, which was a shame. But this is a good day. And then, of course, you get what we were talking about earlier on other days when it's perhaps a little bit windier, when the air's flowing along, going up and down the wind, and we get some lovely cloud streets. And all we do, we climb up under these clouds and we fly along this cloud. So we can fly along this cloud, jump forward, and we can see it's good ahead. So we can keep ploughing on until we end up flying up our own backside. So, but it's really good for soaring. So now that's pretty much thermal. So I'm gonna talk a bit. I'm going to go on in a moment to talk about the third amount of lift, or type of lift that keeps us soaring, which is wave. But before I do that, has anybody got any questions about thermals or hill lift? I'll just have a drink of water. No? Okay. Cool. So, wave. Now, I think anybody who's experienced the joy of wave soaring, it's very different to thermal soaring. It's actually not immensely different from hill soaring. Actually, I mean, let's be honest. I think all of us love whatever soaring we can get, but I can go into all sort of complications. Well, I wish I could. I'm too stupid to go into too many complications about wave. But in basic terms, when the wind blows over the mountain in the right circumstances, you get a train of standing waves that set up downwind. As it says there, waves can go to really much greater heights than the hill causing them. The absolute altitude record now for wave is over 70,000 feet. I think it's 76,000 feet actually, set by the Perlan project in Patagonia, where they're using a pressurized glider. But equally importantly, as it says, it can be very strong. The lift can be very strong, which enables you to fly at very impressive speeds and travel a long way. And we know there's guys, Sansamantes and John Williams up in Scotland, who are sometimes flying 1,500 kilometers in a day. I think in Argentina, in some of those areas, they're flying 3,000 kilometers a day. So, they can do you can do some pretty impressive things in wave. So what does wave look like when you see it in the diagram? So the wind's blowing along. It's pushed up over the hills, and then it starts a series of bumps or ripples. Now, in the right conditions, and I'll try and explain the right conditions in a minute, but I should probably fail miserably, but because I'm more interested in the soaring and how we identify what the weather's like for wave soaring than to be sort of completely accurate. They start to bounce, and then those bounces, they ripple up through the atmosphere. And then it's basically tripped. So if you can imagine the air's pushed up over the mountain. This parcel of air, when it's pushed up over the mountain, it's pushed up over the mountain. It's forced up over the mountain, but it really wants to be down here. So then it tumbles down again, and then it gets to the point, and then it starts to bounce up again. When it hits the ground, all this big mass of air, and then starts to bounce and boing, as it goes downwind. And then these waves set up. You get sort of rotor clouds and roll clouds low down, and lenticulars higher up, which we'll talk about in a minute. But what does that look like? Now, this is a pretty impressive picture. I'm not quite sure where this one's taken, but I took this off the internet. I've used it before. This is what's called a phone gap, FOHN anyway. What's happening here is the wind's blowing from left to right. So the wind's pushed up over the mountains. It's got moist air, and it rises up and it forms cloud. And then as it starts to drop down the other side of the mountain with sort of compressive heating, it dries out. And so on the lee side of the mountain, it's dried out, but it's bouncing. So it's done a big bounce in this valley, and then it starts to bounce up, come up again, and it gets moist again and forms another layer of cloud. So what you've got along here, excuse me, so I'm just going to close the door. Hold on. Okay, so what we've got here is really a very classic situation of wave, and effectively on this edge here is the wave cloud, and you can actually, or the upside of the wave cloud. This is still a wave cloud, but this is the downside. This is the upside. So all you do in gliding terms is we fly up under this cloud, we climb up to this edge, and then once you get to this edge, you then start, there's various techniques. I'm not going to go into the techniques of wave soaring, other than the fact that if you're flying in this bit, it's going up, and it can be going up really very strongly. And you can climb very, very high very often. And then you can start, if you're cross country flying in wave, you can fly along the edge of this, and you can see right away into the distance, which must be possibly 20, 30, 40 kilometers. And all the way along here, this should be working. You might have a bit of a hiatus here, but I doubt it. And you can just fly along that at quite some speed. So you might get I don't know, 1,000 feet a minute. You might get more, you might get double that, you might get less than that. But what that means is that you can fly as fast as you want, pretty much within reason, because you've got to be careful of sort of flutter and overdoing V&E, because your indicated airspeed height will be lower than it will be lower down. So you need to be careful. But you can fly very fast along these fronts and cover great distances, which is what they're doing in Scotland a lot. Okay. So what conditions do we need to produce wave? As it says there, good news, it can happen at any time of the year. More likely in autumn and spring, but a lot of my wave soaring that I've done in the winter. I mean, I've been to where Chris lives, over to Lowenny Park, and flown a lot in the winter. And I'll show you a picture later. When I was there in January, 5th of January, I was at 13,500 feet over Snowdon. And that's the reward you get when you understand when the weather's coming, so you can be there on the right days. So wind's got to be perpendicular to the mountain range, or within about 30 degrees, and increasing velocity with altitude, 20 knots or more near mountaintop level, and either a stable air mass layer aloft, or an inversion below 15,000 feet. So what does that mean? Real basic diagrams here. I mean, this is so 3 diagrams that sort of give you an idea of the sort of conditions you're looking for. I'm not sure I fully understand it myself, but basically when it's not very stable, low stability, if the wind blows up over the mountains, yes, aerodynamic flow will push it up, and yes, you could fly it up in these conditions, and in these conditions you do get wave. That's represented quite well in North Wales, because around Denbigh they get an awful lot of primary wave. Very often it won't oscillate and bounce downwind, but in the area of say 1 or maybe 2 bounces of Snowdonia, it can still be waving. It will oscillate a bit, but in a very unstable situation, there's little resistance to vertical motion, so therefore it blows up, and it just doesn't really work itself. So it's not got anything to bounce against. That's the way I think about it anyway. If it's a very stable situation, yes, it'll go up and it'll go down, but then it won't start bouncing. So you might just get again a primary wave or something like that, or effect over the mountain. But then, so the best sort of situation is where you've got a low stability layer low down, a stable layer in the middle, and a low stability above. And then basically it starts to oscillate, and then effectively it starts to bounce. And beyond that, I'm not going to go into it anymore, because my brain just doesn't work very well on those sorts of things. So the way I look at things is, okay, if I want to go wave soaring, what sort of weather am I looking at? Now, this is what's called a tephogram, and or what's called a sounding. So if you go on RASP, there's a button you can press for, and basically says full parameters. Look at full parameters, and if you click on that button, and then you go into soundings, you can see these. And in fact, you probably don't need to click on the full parameter for the sounding. So you get a sounding, and you can put a sounding into a certain place, although generally I look at
I think we might have just lost Graham there.
Daisy's probably pulled the plug on his PC for stealing it.
Does any of the instructors want to just pick up on and carry on talking about the tephogram? Anyone confident enough to have a chat about the tephogram while we wait for Graham to come back on? Oh, here he is. He's back. He's back. You're on mute, Graham.
Sorry about that. For some reason, of all evenings, I've got a weak connection tonight. I don't know why. Okay, so tephogram. Can people hear me now? And can you see the screen?
Yeah.
A firm and a firm.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah. Got you.
Hello?
We've got you, Graham.
Can people hear me?
Yeah, Roger.
A firm.
Good. Sorry about that. Oh, Jesus. Bloody thing. Can you see the screen?
A firm.
Good. Okay, so I've had to move rooms, try and get a bit closer to the Wi-Fi. I don't know why we're getting these problems tonight, but we are. Okay, so the tephogram. What you've got here is you've got pressure readings on the left. So millibars, 1,000 millibars, 850, 700. So obviously it's reducing with height. 850 millibars, if you look over here, is between the 4 and the 6. So that's 5,000 feet. So 850 millibars is about 5,000 feet. So this on the right here is the altitude scale from 0 right the way up to 32,000 feet. This red line is the wind speed. Now, if you look at these red figures, 0, 40, 80, 120, that's in knots. That's the speed in knots. So what you've got here is a red line that's showing it starting on the ground at probably 10 knots, and it's increasing with height. So at 12,000 feet, it's about 50 knots. Sorry, no, not 50 knots. It's about 12,000 feet. It's about 30, 35 knots of wind. By the time you get to 22,000 feet, and that's not unrealistic to get to in a glider with oxygen. Even in Wales on a regular basis, they're up at 19, 20,000 feet. It's at probably about 50 knots up there. So with height, it's gradually increasing with height. So there's a nice profile here. On the left here, you see the wind direction indicators. So these are all telling you which way the wind's going. So from the left, it's from the west. From the right, it's from the east. So if you see here, mostly, it's a little bit skewed at the bottom, but mostly all the way up, this tephrogram is showing the wind is increasing with height. So you've got the little arrow feathers on these, and that's also showing you what the wind speed is at that height. It's all pretty much in the same direction, and that's what you're looking for with wave. So wind all coming from the same direction and increasing with height. It's also relative to temperature as well, but I can't really remember what the temperature region has got to be, so I won't bother worrying about it. So if you get up in wave, what do you see? And I think for all of us, this is the important point. I mean, it's certainly important.
Can I just ask before you go on?
Yeah.
That tephrogram, we're talking about the areas of the stable and the unstable air sandwich. How does that express itself on the tephrogram?
I'm blowed if I know, mate, to be honest with you. And I have studied it a number of times, but I keep on forgetting it and getting confused. So I don't try and get myself too confused with that. I just say, on most situations, if the wind's increasing with height and the wind's in all the same direction, there's a bloody good chance there's going to be some wave. Okay, it's not always the case, but majority of the time it is. I'm sure there's others out there, perhaps Chris or others that can explain that better than me. I want to go wave soaring. Sorry, Chris, I can't really explain.
Can I ask another similar but general question? Other than the tephrogram,
Go ahead, say again.
I was just going to ask, other than the tephrogram, how do you work out if air is stable or unstable?
Well, if you remember back, if you remember back to the original diagram, Tom Bradbury's diagram, yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, Tom Bradbury's diagram shows you two things. You've got a cold front going through and a warm front going through. So if we want good thermal weather, we want a cold front going through with a cold sector behind it. And actually, if you remember at the top of that diagram, in fact, let's just go back a bit. Bear with me. I've not got my mouse now. I've gone to this. Right. So if you remember, the best area for wave was where you had long, straight isobars coming through here. And it was somewhere between the low pressure and the high pressure. It was actually a bit closer to the low than the high. But the point is, what you don't want is too much instability. So this is a good area for wave. But if you think about it, very often after a warm front has passed through, you will get better conditions for wave coming through. Okay, so if you asking me what you'd look for a good wave day, is those sort of similar sort of straight isobar conditions behind a warm front, and that can be a very good indication that you're going to get good wave. All right.
Thanks, Graham.
That makes sense. Okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Graham, but when it's Llewellyn Park, the isobars go horizontally across Britain for the wave there, the direction. The best
direction you're going to get. There's a lot of potential for wave out Llewellyn Park when the wind's from the west, for sure. Anyway, around from sort of well, Chris Fox. I mean, northwest, or sorry, northwest round the way to southwest, but best west, yeah.
Stand by. I mean, yes.
Mr. Fox, are you there?
Yes, I am. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, southwesterly is best. I mean, at Llywelyn, the best indication of wave is the wind is blowing and it's coming from the west.
Exactly. And pretty much
there will almost always be some
whenever
kind
it's
of wave
blowing from the
around
west, not
somewhere.
always.
Whether it's usable is a different question.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, if you got it from the west, I would say 70% of the time there's wave that you can use. Yeah, as long as the wind's strong enough, of course.
Indeed.
Good. Yeah, I thought so. So, moving on. I don't want to move on. So, if we look at this picture, this picture is actually this was taken on the 5th of January this year, and this is at about 10,000 feet, certainly plus 10,000 feet over, having taken out off from Llywelyn. There were gaps like this all the way. They were chopping and changing, and when I got over to Snowdon, which is on our left over here, I was at what 13,500 feet under complete, or over the above complete cloud cover. Cloud was probably about 7,000 feet beneath me, obviously. And a lot of you having seen the most recent footage from New Zealand, you know, those of us that are flying out of Llywelyn, you know, you're fully equipped with cloud flying equipment, GPS, so you know where you are, and you're being very, very, very careful. And the technique for flying a wave here, this wasn't a bad day actually, crossing the gaps. You'd fly up on this side of the gap here and cross over to the next wave cloud and jump onto the front of that. Obviously, in the technique for wave soaring is you've got to get across the gap fairly quickly. So you actually fly faster than you normally would on a Macready, I think, really. That's how I do it. And obviously, I'm trying to go over the gaps where the wave cloud is at its shallowest, so I'm not in the real sink. And then a bit later in the year, and this is what it's all about, nice pictures and interesting and fun type times, where we were up at, this was the day we were up at Sutton Bank, Andrew. Everybody was trying to get into this wave. It come along in the later part of the day. This slightly shiny top here is Mr. Shelton. We jumped in a K21. We took off. We came off tow quite high, 4,000 feet sometimes. Watch it. I am watching it. I can see the shine in it. Go on. But yeah, we took probably a 4,000 foot air tow. Not quite as high as Tiago. Tiago, is he on tonight? Don't know.
No, he's not. That is known as.
Wasn't 7,000 feet, was it? But
that was Tiago Day, wasn't it? That was Tiago's.
Tiago 7,000 foot man. Yeah. So we came off here because there wasn't much point mucking around. We wanted to go for a nice evening flying. So I'm going to show you a range of photos. We took off, we released about here, we climbed up under this cloud, pushed out in front, and you can see the slope, the beautiful sort of lenticular. It was a beautiful, beautiful evening. The next photograph I'll show is us being a bit closer to the cloud. I mean, with wave, like all soaring, like thermal clouds, there'll be strong parts of the lift and weak parts of the lift. So what we were doing is we were flying along the side, it's getting closer, being further away, just testing out where you were going to get the strongest lift. And we didn't go mega high on this evening. I think we got up to about 9,000 above sea level, I think. So, and this was a picture once we'd flown along this bar, which, if you imagine, that last picture was, or the first picture was about here. The second picture was about here. And by the time we got to the end of this bar and turned around and to fly back along this bar, we were well above the bar. The Fon gap here, the wind from right to left bouncing and causing, creating this rather lovely view. And it was lovely as well. And then last but by no means least, a photograph at Staffordshire. And I think, Phil, because I think you're on it, this was the photograph, one of the photographs I took when we were flying either earlier this year or last year. I can't remember which, Phil. And this is some sort of fairly weak but interesting easterly wave over Stafford. So, you know, and we do get plenty of wave, actually, and sometimes more than we think, I think, from Staffordshire, sometimes from the east, mostly from the west. So a good northwesterly or into the west in the right conditions, that you can get some lovely wave out of Staff. So all in all, that's all, folks. So just a bit of, how I go about thinking about soaring and the weather for going soaring. As I say, if you wait for the perfect day, you'll never get it. But they come along more often than you think, I think, sometimes. So any questions?